across the Bug River. Turn 5, admin's been done, just about to kick off with the main part of the turn, the operations phase. There was a few replacement points, didn't really cannibalise anything from the Soviet side, but the Germans did have a few replacement points to spend this time. There was a little bit of attrition, like supply-based attrition down here. The Soviets lost a strength point or two for being isolated and already disrupted. Supply attrition doesn't really happen as much as you think it might do actually in this game, and it seems to be quite unusual or difficult to cause the kind of supply problems that would normally typify a game or of this particular area with the drawn out supply lines that you might see in sort of other Eastern Front type games. So what is going on? The turn 5 does see the introduction of the 215th Mechanized Division for the Russians. That is mechanized in name only. There's absolutely no motorized units whatsoever in this group of units, but they are reasonably strong, although sorely lacking in anti-tank points, which is going to be a bit of an issue because they are all the way up the top there and facing the panzers, as you would probably not want to do if you were a division with no anti-tank whatsoever. I've placed them as the Russian player within reach of the defence there, if possible, in case of throwing them all at the German tanks, and also to try and help support the two victory point hexes where I just indicated there. The other division that's come on, or half of which has come on, is the 19th Tank Division, which is a proper tank division. However, it is relatively weak, I guess, ish, compared to some of the German tanks, as maybe you'd expect at this point in the Second World War. But they are all the way over here, and again, basically as far away as they can get from where they're needed at the moment. So a few challenges there for the Russians, even with the reinforcements. But because the Soviets did kind of break this barrier line here, there's a very faint dotted line on the map with these panzers to claim the town of Verba. The Russians did get a few additional reserves come on, and this is like the remains of the 41st Tank Division who have come on just at the top there. And they are a much better set of tanks. The anti-tank points, or the tank points as it is for motorised units, is at 7, which is probably the highest in the entire game, top of my head. So that's pretty good for the Russians, and hopefully will help smooth out some of that 215th mechanized lack of any armour. Yeah, however, I sort of waved my hand around in front of the screen a moment ago because we see the return of these counters here, which are counterattack orders that the Russians have to expend in the form of a prepared attack. If they don't, it's 1 victory point per unexpended order to the Germans at the end of the game. Now, my experience earlier in the game, you may or may not remember, was that these counterattack orders are really not that great from a Russian point of view, because you send typically weaker forces up against the generally much stronger German side, and previously came off a lot worse than the Germans did, although we did get rid of those orders, so that's not so bad maybe. But anyway, introduction done. German formations are, just dropped something. German formations are pretty solid over on the side here, with mostly with 4 active formation activations, a couple of the panzers with 6. Meanwhile, up on the top side of the map there, we have the generally much lower, if more numerous, divisions of the Soviet Union. Lower formation activations, that is, even if they are more numerous in number. Okay, I'm off to play. Catch you in a moment. Jumping ahead to the end of turn 5, the story of the turn has really been very similar to that of last turn. The Germans have used their panzers just here and up here to punch through what defences the Soviets could muster. The use of terrain and more specialised units for the Soviets this turn hasn't really benefited the way I would have liked from a Soviet point of view. However, that's not to say it's been a total disaster for the Soviets, because there has been an opportunity to reposition and form a greater defensive line than before. So just briefly looking at what's happened before I move on to a couple of interesting elements of the game that I haven't really talked about so far in this series. Looking first just here at a town called Berezovichy. The Panzers have used, the 13th Panzers have really used their numerical advantage in terms of just sheer volume of armour to provide that necessary attack or that thrust along the main road, and the anti-tank units that were under here haven't really had much joy, despite being in the more advantageous terrain from a Soviet point of view. The anti-tanks just have struggled again in the face of the Panzers. They've inflicted some strength point losses, some disruptions here and there. For example, the stack here is full of disrupted Panzer units with some strength point losses, but overall the tide of those confrontations have gone quite badly for the Soviets. Down here, the infantry, whose name I routinely forget, I think it's the 6th, have got around the south and are now making their way up here through the victory point hexes, the other side of this river, because this river is quite a nice defensive feature for the Soviets, but the 6th have managed to get all the way underneath and around. And near the Volodymyr-volinskii region, just here, again, same sort of story. The that unit there, which is the 44th, have managed to get through and up into this region here, which is now going to be the last line of defence, if you like, before the northern part of the map is completely taken by the Germans. The 41st tank units on the Soviet side have been around here near the town of Verba, along with the 215th infantry, or mechanised division maybe, but they're certainly infantry as far as the makeup of the division is concerned. They've using the terrain here to try and stop this 14th Panzer advance. And they've done quite well. There's enough of them there to have limited the advance of those Panzers, but we have this whole 298th division here, all infantry, able to come across through the marshy terrain and round the back of those tanks, which I'm expecting will happen probably next turn, I would expect. So from a Soviet point of view, it's not gone very well. Germans, the exact opposite, it's going quite well, although there is an element of needing to be a little bit quicker, I think, for the Germans to get through those defences, particularly just here, in order to get some of these more eastern victory points hexes off the edge of the map. If I just pan across a little bit, hopefully we'll see that there are some victory point hexes just here, and then a couple dotted around. So the Germans need to be a little bit quicker in that respect. Soviets, who knows how the Soviets are going to stop this juggernaut of a German advance, as one of the comments described it in the last video. That's a very good question, but I'm just wondering whether or not, from a victory point perspective, whether it's not about turning the tide of the ever advancing German machine. It's more about delaying it enough so that they don't get as many victory points as they perhaps could do. Look more at victory points a little bit later, probably in the next turn overview video. But before we move and close out this particular video, I wanted to talk about the importance of this counter here, which is the Schlachtengluck counter, and the equivalent in Cyrillic there. That counter is essentially a reroll, and when a side has possession of that token, if they do a particularly bad roll, whether that's in combat or in formation activation, you can expend it in order to reroll, and then of course the other player will get that after the reroll. But if you keep hold of that reroll as a player, particularly if you're in an advantageous position, you're then denying the opponent the opportunity to have that second chance, and that's proving to be incredibly powerful in this game, because even though the Germans haven't had the best die rolls that they've had in the game, not re-rolling and keeping hold of that select and look re-roll counter means that when the Russians have a terrible roll, particularly in formation activation, they can then push the Soviets into not wasting, but having very poor activations. So, for example, we're talking about the anti-tank units and the 41st Tank Division on the Soviet side having perhaps not as much luck as they could have done in some of these battles, just down here and then near the top. And part of that was because they would roll a 1 or a 2, and a 1 or a 2 even on a 6 formation activation level, which is the highest for the Soviets, is still only going to result in 1 action point, meaning you can move 1 unit, put 1 improved defense counter on one of these on a defensive position. That's really not very helpful from a point of view of the person who cannot re-roll. So for the Germans to keep hold of that, it's incredibly powerful. And combine that with an element of the game where when you have the initiative die roll, so if I just move the camera over slightly, at the beginning of each round you have this initiative track, and you roll the die, and the person who wins the initiative, allowing for any modifiers, gets to choose whether they activate a formation, which is what usually happens, whether they pass, which means they forego any remaining activations, or they can pass the activation over to the opponent. So that means that even though they've won the initiative, they can force the opponent to take a turn. So if you imagine for a moment the Germans have won the initiative, they don't want to move any of their panzers, they know that some of the Soviet formations have relatively low levels of formation activations left. There's not a huge amount that can be done with a lot of the divisions. So maybe the German player then says, okay, Soviet player, you take the turn, this turn, you go. And that means that if there's nothing they can really do with some of these units like here, or these divisions like this one, which is kind of stuck, or various, that they can't really move because it will break the defensive line, it forces the player to move those divisions that they can do something with, which in the Soviet player's case this turn was the 41st Tanks and the anti-tank divisions. But then they get a bad roll, and they can't re-roll it. Not only have they been forced to spend an activation that they may not have wanted to that turn, but they've also got a very poor result from it. And do that 2 or 3 times over the course of a turn, as happened in this turn, and all of a sudden the battle really has just been lost, really, or the turn at least has been lost from the point of view of the player that suffers that amount of bad luck and strategic outthinking, shall we say, in terms of the use of that counter. Okay, in terms of the game now, it's progressing very well from the German point of view, and I think we will be moving into the penultimate turn, next turn, turn 6, and I will have a quick look at the victory point conditions in a bit more detail next turn, as well as hopefully coming up with a way of trying to turn this around for the Soviets. No luck yet, but you never know. Until next time, goodbye.